get ready to rumble!
Hello and welcome to a new edition of Political Smackdown. I'm your host, Mike Philbeck. This week we have Betsy Wells to my far right today. Betsy, how about that? And Roger substituting again for Andy Dedman, Roger Harris, former member of the school board and principal. Glad to have you back.
Thank you.
And of course Wes Westmoreland, who served a short stint in the North Carolina Senate. I almost said the U.S.
You almost promoted me.
Yeah, I almost did. Well, we're going to get started. Well, we're going to have a local event that happened this week to start off with. At the May 21st meeting, County Manager David Cotton presented his first budget since coming last summer to be the manager of Cleveland County. The commissioners have set a public hearing after receiving his budget proposal for June the 4th at their regular meeting, which I believe will be at 6 p.m. in Commissioner Chambers. If you'd like to comment on the budget, you can do that. In the meantime, you can see the budget online at the Cleveland County website, and it is available if you don't want to do it online. If you go up to the clerk's office and ask to see the budget, you have the right to do that. So he presented a PowerPoint presentation of his proposal for the budget. The budget is the general fund budget will be $186 million plus next year. The total county budget over $225 million. So it's not an unsubstantial budget. And I think we have a slide to show you a little bit about that if you want to bring that up, Tim, before we start commenting otherwise. So what says FY, or fiscal year 21, that was actually adopted in June of 2020, and you'll see that the total tax base of the county was $9.5 billion, and the tax rate was 57 cents, and they had got about $950,000 for a penny. Now you can see the very next year was after reval, and they reduced the rate to 0.5475, or 54 3/4 cents per $100 of tax value, and they were collecting $1 million, or about 50,000 more. And so if you cross over into the last one there, you'll see that every year the tax base has risen some, and they collect a little more, and they're up to $1.1 million they collect for every penny on the tax rate. And this year's proposal will keep the county tax rate at 54 3/4. The school tax rate, which is not included there, will be 14 cents of the same tax value. And if you live in the volunteer fire districts, it's 8 3/4, and none of those have changed. So you all have looked at the slides, and well, let's just show where that revenue comes from before y'all start commenting. We've got another slide. This is where the revenue comes from, and you'll see slightly over half of it comes from your property taxes, otherwise known in Latin as the ad valorem tax, meaning by the value. And you'll see the next big thing where it's coming into the general fund budget is local option sales taxes, which are about 35% of what the ad valorem taxes are, and there is a relationship there among all the governments. Then you see the other ones, intergovernmental revenues between other, where they get federal money and state money. All of that comes in there and goes right back out. Where they make sales, where they give permits and fees, and then a small miscellaneous less than 1%. And then let's show the final slide of where the money goes in the pie. You'll see the biggest public safety is the biggest. Human services, that's going to be your DSS, your health department, and that kind of stuff. And then education, of course, is very close behind that. I think most of you know those are the three biggest things in county government these days in North Carolina. General governments, all your other department expenditures, you've got your economic development fund, and you see a little sliver at the bottom, nearly 1%, that's recreational and cultural. So, Roger, get us started. I know you've probably looked at some of it. What stands out to you in the county budget?
Well, it sort of reminded me of those old war movies where the captain's on the bridge and he gives the orders, maintain course and speed.
And that's sort of what I saw. There's not a whole lot of excitement. By that I mean a whole lot of big changes. It's just sort of maintaining course and speed. As you say, the tax rate remains the same. I did see that there was a 3.75% COLA for county employees, which is good.
I believe it's 3.5. 2% July 1 and 1.5%.
That's right.
1.5%
going out,
in January.
Yep.
They're gonna save a little money for 6 months by doing it.
They're
6
going to do
months
it,
apart.
half part of it in the first 6 months, but by the time the end of the budget year comes around, 3.75, I think. Which Betsy, I think, is about 3.75% more than retired state employees are getting this year. Tax base growth seemed to be pretty flat to me. I was pleased to see that school educators, the employees, are going to get a bump in their supplement. It's going to go up to 10% from, I think it's 9.25 now. But even that small increase, that's $1 million to go from 9.25 to 10%. But that's something the county commissioner and school board have worked on for many, many years.
Property tax revenue to the school system is up $1 million, and I guess that's what that's for.
And I'll say one more thing, and I don't want to dominate the conversation. I was pleased that the county seems to be aggressively paying down their current debt. It reminded me of a married couple that's kind of paying extra on their mortgage every month, trying to get that down, and I thought that was a good fiscal responsibility.
All right, Wes?
Well, I'm going to start with where you ended, Mr. Harris. That was a surprising thing, debt service less than 1%. And if you look at the projection, it drops fairly quickly down to next to nothing. And that's on top of the buildings that are starting and will be going up soon. Mike, the budget's been generally flat. I agree. It's maintained the course, and we'll have to give kudos to the commissioners, one, for outlining for the manager what they anticipate, what their priorities are, what they want done. And then I think also to a brand new county manager for meeting those priorities. There are only slight increases in some fees, which is a use tax, not an across the board tax. But Mike, a huge part of this budget is mandated by state and federal government. So there's only so much the commissioners can do within the needs, but obviously the priorities are sound, and I think this is another in the line of pretty good budgets, although I'm sure there are exceptions we could take over any one little line item.
So the county owes about $41 million overall in debt right now, and over the next 10 years, over 99% of that will go away. And a lot of that debt is not county general fund debt. It belongs to other county entities. The city of Shelby, and they're working with them on industrial projects and other things. And I will say this, Cleveland County's bond rating from Standard & Poor's is AA+, which is excellent for a county this size. And from Moody's, it's AA1, which is similar. You don't get AAA at this size county, like there's not 70-something counties countrywide that have AAA, and a few of them are in North Carolina, but they're all bigger counties than Cleveland. But those are good. Betsy, what stands out to you?
Well, of course, and knowing what I talk about property taxes, that was one of the first things I looked at. And I was pleased to see that property taxes are expected to come in higher this time than the budgeted level. And as of April 2024, there's been 98% collection rate. And I too looked at the debt and thought that the county had done well with projecting over 10 years to pay off like 99.5% of their debt.
It's amazing what happens when Republicans are in charge, isn't it?
I was just getting ready to say it had been set up a long time ago before just that all-Republican board. But I do encourage the citizens of the county to look into the budget. If you don't have a computer, you can always come up, like Mike said, and to the clerk of court and look at it. Maybe she'll make you a copy, and then go to the hearing on June the 4th.
I don't believe I'd go to the clerk of court. I'd go to the county manager's office to see the clerk to the board.
Right, okay, all right.
Is part of the reason to pay down the debt is an anticipation of borrowing more money for the Justice Center? I've heard that may be in the works.
Well, obviously, they're going to have to borrow up to $75 million above what they have and what the state has granted.
That's the number I've heard.
So we're going to have a bigger debt. But my understanding from my conversations with commissioners is unless there's some major thing that happens, they will still not have to raise tax rate to fund that debt.
That's
because
right.
this debt is going
That's
down
right.
and the tax base is going up.
And I think during the groundbreaking, the speaker alluded to the potential of some more state money coming in to help with that. But the point is, the debt has been well managed.
Absolutely.
And just the leadership that we have in Cleveland County is stellar, and I think this budget shows that.
Well, I mentioned a couple other things that I just looked up. One of the things that's been a little bit controversial, and your cohort, Andy, has had a little to say about this, is
Let's be talking baseball.
American Legion funding. Last year, they reduced American Legion funding this year by $75,000 from $425 to $350 total. And next year's budget is flat. It's at $350 for the American Legion tournament we'll have this August. And so that's there. Another thing that's interesting to me is the county will since I think 2014, they've been trying to build their fund balance. And by that, I mean basically unappropriated money that can be used for emergency. And it needs to be at least around 20% for a county our size. Last year, it ended at 21.7, so they have accomplished that. There were a few years they were below it. And I will tell y'all, that's not as much as you might think. That just means that a month uses 8.33% of your total budget. So that's about 2.5 months. And so it's not huge. It sounds like a lot. It is millions of dollars, but all these local governments need to keep at least that. And the smaller the government, the bigger percentage they really need, is the historic way of looking at that. So any other comments on the budget?
One other thing that I noticed that has made a significant difference, talking about the money in reserves and how it's managed and the income that the county receives by doing a good job of managing that money. Sitting there, it's not buried in a mason jar in the backyard, it's being invested. And while I don't think government should generally invest money, the reality, they have to have this cushion. And some of that comes from grant monies that have come from the state that are not expended yet, but it's really made a big difference in income for the county just in managing their money.
There are 11 new positions, which means 11 what we call FTEs, full-time equivalent positions in the budget. However, they say that only 3 of those are being funded through the general fund. The others come from alternative revenue sources, and I have not checked to see what that is, but that has to be state and federal money, I would think.
I would think. And
But I was very
presumably
pleased to
recurring.
see an increase in the supplement. I remember over years, Kings Mountain Shelby paid supplements and the county teachers didn't get any. And that was the one reason that that merger happened. And I'm glad to see, and we don't know what's going to happen in Raleigh. So I'm glad to see that,
And a
that we
10% supplement is
appreciate.
basically an extra check.
It is.
Teachers get paid for 10
Maybe
months.
one
of
day
school.
all public
Extra
school
check.
teachers can receive that.
I think that had something to do with charter schools, but I'm not sure, Roger. Well, folks, we're going to be about a minute early going to break. We've spent most of the first half of the show. We're going to go ahead and go to break, not to split up the next subject.
I'm Deb Harden, host of For Your Information. The goal of our show is to educate and entertain you about all things pets throughout Cleveland County. We have various guests joining me each month to talk about dogs, cats, pigs, whatever kind of pet you can think of. Also each month, we will be joined by some furry friends looking for their forever homes. For your information each month, right here on C19 TV and online at www.c19.tv.
Welcome back to the second half of Political Smackdown. Well, masks, M-A-S-K-S, that we all got used to during COVID are back in the news in North Carolina. Last week, the North Carolina Senate passed a bill on a party line 30-15 vote, Republicans voting yes and Democrats voting no, and 5 Democrats not voting, to revert to the pre-COVID rules that demonstrators cannot wear masks. It was pointed out in the Senate during the discussion that this only applies to people who are wearing masks while protesting, committing crimes, and so on, and that no one needed to worry about wearing them in public for health reasons, that nobody was going to arrest them. But nonetheless, all the Democrats objected, and when it got to the House, some of the Republican House members have said, including John Torbett from Gastonia and Aaron Perry from down east, that they want a medical exception put into it so there'll be no question that if you believe you're immunocompromised and you want to wear it to retail stores or wherever, that there won't be any question, somebody will think you're going to commit a crime or something. So it has not passed the House. The House did not concur, and Senate, it'll go to a joint committee to iron out any differences. So Betsy, get us started. Do you think their concerns were warranted, or is it an overreaction? It would have just been like it was before COVID.
And if they had just kept it, what the House wanted about wearing a mask, to commit a crime or to block a road. But no, the Senate had to step in and extend it into public health. And I think that, what are they going to do if they pass this and to where you can't wear a mask? Are you going to have the mask police out there telling people, giving them tickets if they wear a mask? I think it's just terrible that we cannot get along with trying to figure out what's best for the people and what's best for the citizens and just deal with it. It just seemed like it started off as being a little mud puddle and now it's a big flood. So we'll just see what happens. I think that people ought to have it comes down to personal liberty. And Republicans all the time talk about personal liberty and people choosing to wear the mask for their own health or for their immune system. So we'll see.
Buck Newton pointed out all they were doing was going back to the exact same law that they had pre-COVID.
Before.
That we never had a problem
And we
with.
never had a problem with, but it does look like there'll be some medical exception if it's going to pass the House.
Well, this reminds me of, was it Hillary or somebody, never let a crisis go to waste? So COVID, we adopted things to deal with.
That's Carville. That's James Carville.
Was that Carville? Okay.
I'm glad to see you all watch him.
Oh, I enjoy watching him. But
He's entertaining.
He is.
during what was clearly a crisis with COVID, a number of things changed, whether it was how to vote, how you could vote, mask wearing, et cetera, to make it easier for people to deal with the crisis and the fact that the government had closed everything and created a big part of the crisis. Now we try to go back to it and everybody throws their hands up like this is all crazy. We can't go back to that. The reality, the masks, the way they have become commonly worn, don't reliably work to prevent the spread of viruses. We heard follow the science for all these years. Now we find out the science was not actually science. But Betsy, I agree. I don't think this passes in its current form. I think a carve-out will be made for health, and I think that's fine. I have no problem with making that adjustment to it.
Mr. Harris?
And that's the way I see it as well. Yeah, the Senate, nobody really objects, I don't think, or not many people object to having protesters show their face. That's not the issue. The issue is I think, during the pandemic, a lot of anti-mask activists got all upset because they were required to wear masks. They didn't like it when they went in stores and on planes, and now it looks like there are some people, not all, but some in the Senate that said, all right, we're going to turn the tables. We're going to make it against the law to wear a mask. We'll turn it around. Fortunately, when it got to the House, Tim Moore and the Republicans said, no, there needs to be a health and safety exemption. The Senate intentionally took that out. I know that Buck Newton said, don't worry about that, but sometimes you got to look at what people do, not what people say. And they took that exemption out, and the Senate didn't stand for that. A cancer patient who needs to go to the pharmacy to get a prescription should not worry about being arrested because they're wearing a medical mask. I have a couple of folks in my church every Sunday that because they're fragile in their health, they feel more comfortable wearing a mask. Those folks should not have to commit a crime in order to go to church wearing a mask. If they'll put that medical exemption back in that the Senate took out, I think it'll sail through and nobody would object.
I agree, but as long as they go to church and don't carry a gun and shoot somebody with the mask on, it's not gonna be a problem.
I don't think it would have been a problem, but I don't think it'll hurt anything if they carve out the language in such a way that it makes it clear. You probably still don't need to go to those protests wearing a mask. I think that's gonna be
I
the
agree.
clear thing.
If they'll put that
And
in
blocking
conference,
the
I think
road.
it'll sail through.
Well, our old Obama appointee, Loretta Biggs, a federal judge, is back in the news, and she has finished her bench trial. As you know, we did voter ID in municipal elections. We did them in the March and May primary, and even the State Board of Elections, 3 Democrats, asked her to dismiss this case. But it's a federal case because there's no state case, because at the state level, the Supreme Court we have now reversed the previous Supreme Court and said that the voter ID law was not discriminatory. And so this is the last possible hurrah, and Loretta Biggs has been a nemesis to the legislature more than once over voter ID and other things.
Atta girl.
And the real question now, even the Fourth Circuit, where this will go to if she does it away, will likely overturn it. They have already said this is not a discriminatory thing. So maybe there's hope she won't, but Betsy, you can get us started. Do you think Loretta Biggs will try to make us not have voter ID in North Carolina in November or not?
Well, I know that she has certainly been, like you said, the nemesis of the voter ID people. In North Carolina, 1.8 million voters cast ballots in the March 5th primary. Out of that number, there was 1,185 provisional ballots. Now, if you go to vote and you don't have your voter ID, they will give you a provisional ballot. And then you have got a certain amount of time to go back up to the elections board and show them your voter ID. And out of that, there were 477 provisional ballots that did not get counted, even though, like I said, there was 1.8 million votes cast. But you still have that, this case has been ongoing, and so you finish what you start. So maybe this will finish it, although it sounds like, depending on what she rules, whether or not it will be overturned at the 4th level. You still have, I personally feel like that the voter ID discriminates against African Americans and Latinos and poor people. So we'll see what Ms. Biggs says.
To know what those 400 people that couldn't vote means, you'd have to know more about who they were. And also, you'd have to go back and look when we didn't have voter ID and see how many provisional ballots statewide did not count. Roger, what are your thoughts?
Proving the GOP legislators had discriminatory intent is going to be a challenge for anybody in the courtroom. That's just a hard thing. I agree with Betsy. I think the March primary showed that there was not a whole lot of problem with people being turned away at the polls. People did seem to be aware of the provision and the requirement. The one thing that we can never know, because I don't know that you can measure it, is how many voters simply chose not to go to the polls because they didn't have an ID and know they would be turned away. That can never be measured, and it's just anybody's guess what that number was. I've made peace with the voter ID thing. I think it solves a problem that didn't exist in the first place, but it's about as useless as a solar-powered flashlight.
Wes, you want to straighten these Democrats out?
Yeah, the first obvious point, no one is turned away. Everyone can cast a ballot with or without an ID. The ballot's then put aside and they're given the chance to come present an ID over the, 10 days prior to canvass, I think. We've heard since 2016 about election integrity. Hillary said the elections were rigged. Trump said the elections were rigged. This helps erase the opportunity to complain about that. Voters passed it by a 10-point margin. Mike, the frustration is this is a bench trial, so it's the judge's decision alone. The same judge that blocked the law in 2019 was overturned by the appeals court. Pretty good idea how she's likely to rule again, further convoluting the November election. I'm just ready for this to be settled. The voters want it. Let's have voter ID.
Well, I'm going to keep a slight amount of hope that she will actually find that this time she's going to let it go because she knows what the ultimate consequence is likely to be. Quickly now, we just got a minute or two, and I'll go with you at this, Roger, but Catherine Truitt, the current superintendent of education, proposed early this year that we start doing grading in a different way in public schools. Now there's a bill being introduced in the legislature saying we need a different way than the old A, B, C, D, F system that you and I have known our whole lives, and Betsy and Wes as well. I have to admit, I made 1 F in Miss Lay's math class because I didn't do my homework 6 weeks my senior year, but it got my attention. So is there a better way?
Well, to be clear, the idea has nothing to do with individual student grades. It's not talking about the student who gets an A in PE and a C in spelling. It's not that at all. It's how the schools are graded. Schools get a grade as well. Okay. And currently, the way it's done is 80% testing and 20% growth. There's been a lot of us that have argued that formula should be changed for a long time, and this proposal is to make it 50% testing, 30% growth, and then 20%, I think, workforce readiness and opportunities or something like that. So there's a lot of merit. It deserves more conversation time than what we have right now. But it's not individual student grades, it's school grades.
30 seconds, Wes.
I'd just say growth and opportunity are very subjective. This changes every year how the state looks at it, and it convolutes things. If I'm a high-performing teacher, a high-performing school, there's only so much growth that can occur. And that's something that needs to be considered as they look at this.
Absolutely.
30 seconds.
All right, I think, you should let teachers have a big input about how to change grades if you're going to talk about changing grades for students.
All right, we're going to go to the lightning round. Mr. Harris, you can go first.
All right, good old teacher going to give a book report. I try to read a nonfiction book about once a month. This is the latest one I got. George Stephanopoulos, The Situation Room.
Stephanopoulos, that is fiction.
Listen, it is a fascinating story of the Situation Room in the White House. Starts with John F. Kennedy creating it right after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. It covers what was going on in the Situation Room on 9/11, the day Reagan was shot, the day justice finally came to Osama bin Laden. It is a fascinating read for anybody who's interested in U.S. history and government, and I suspect that's most of the people watching this program. It's a great book.
Wes?
I bet that is a good read. Well, this is the 230th day for the Americans held in captivity. But on another note, President Biden is spending your money again to buy votes, with the announcement this week of another $7.7 billion of student loans lifted from largely high earners and shifted to everyone else. This brings the total cost to taxpayers to $1.4 trillion. In addition, this week, Mike, the president announced he's going to release another 100 million barrels of oil from the depleted strategic oil reserve to reduce gas prices ahead of July 4th. He's not going to buy my vote for a few pennies at the pump.
Betsy?
I don't think he's going to get your vote anyway.
He don't have enough money to get his vote done.
I'm just, by the time we tape next week, we may have a decision made in the Trump trial in New York. So I'm just going to wait and see what's going to happen to our past president.
Well, I noticed an article just yesterday or this morning that there are 85,500 kids on waiting lists to get in charter schools in North Carolina. There are 221 charter schools now versus 100 when the Republicans took away the cap. Their grades are doing well in most of them. And the thing that shocked me, Wes, is there are more African Americans as a percentage of charter school population than there are the regular public schools in North Carolina now. It's still low on Hispanics, but they have become much more diverse as it's been expanded. And in these big cities, a lot of your parents who don't have other means to get them further away are finding charter schools. I think it's just a fascinating article. Folks, come back and we'll talk about some other subjects next week on Political Smackdown.